Have you ever loved someone so deeply that walking away wasn't about giving up, but about protecting what little of yourself you had left? Claire Whitmore once believed in forever. She believed it when Garrett Hale kissed her forehead, when he made promises under city lights, when he whispered that her dreams mattered too, but forever didn't come. Instead, it shattered quietly, painfully when pride won over love, and she left without a word, carrying more than just a broken heart. She carried a son. 6 years later, life forces her back into Garrett's world, not as a lover, not even as herself, but as an architect with a hidden past and one impossible choice. Would you tell the man who hurt you that he's a father? Would you risk everything to give your child what you never had, or would you stay silent to protect him from repeating the past? This isn't just a second chance at love. It's a reckoning between who we were, who we became, and who we dare to become next. If you've ever lost someone too soon or held a truth too long, please like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories. Now, let's begin this quiet, powerful storm. The rain had a quiet way of falling in Ashburn Heights. It didn't rush or roar. It whispered, soft taps on the windshield, like fingers asking to be let in. Claire Whitmore sat alone in the driver's seat of her aging Volvo, parked across from the sleek glass facade of Hale Development Group. The building towered over the wet streets like a monolith, modern, polished, unmoved by time. Unlike her, she ran a hand through her damp chestnut hair and exhaled slowly. It had been 6 years since she last stood in this city. 6 years since she'd driven away from it with more pain than luggage. Now she was back. By choice, by duty, by the push of a contract she couldn't refuse and a past that had never quite let her go. Claire stared up at the glass windows of the building. Somewhere in there, he was waiting. Garrett Hale. The name still had weight. He was now CEO, ruthless, brilliant, untouchable. But to her, he would always be the man who once painted blueprints by firelight, the man who looked at her like she was his compass, the man who turned away, cold as stone, when everything fell apart. She reached for her portfolio, her fingers trembling just enough for her to notice. "Breathe," she whispered to herself. "You've survived worse." She stepped out into the drizzle, her beige trench coat soaking almost immediately. The soft patter of rain echoed around her as she walked toward the building's entrance. The lobby was warm, lit by brass lamps and the scent of rain-soaked leather. She passed the front desk with a quiet nod and took the elevator to the 31st floor, where the meeting would be held. As the doors slid open, she took a moment, straightened her back, lifted her chin, smoothed her hair, then stepped forward. The boardroom was all steel and glass, sleek as the man sitting at the head of the long table, Garrett Hale. He didn't look up right away, just continued scribbling on a notepad, his jaw tight, brows furrowed, like the world rested on the tip of his pen. Claire's heels tapped softly on the floor as she approached. "Good afternoon," she said evenly. "Claire Whitmore, lead architect, Whitmore Studio." There was a pause, a beat where no one breathed. Then Garrett finally looked up, his eyes steel gray. Unreadable met hers. It was like opening a door she thought had been nailed shut. Neither warmth nor hatred, just silence, and rain falling softly outside the window behind him. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, his voice low, even, "we appreciate your punctuality. Let's begin." And just like that, the meeting started. But something else had already begun. A storm that had waited 6 years for its first thunder. Claire stood at the head of the conference room table, her hands resting lightly on a set of renderings. The rain outside hadn't let up. It whispered against the floor-to-ceiling windows, a quiet soundtrack to the tension inside the room. Garrett Hale sat across from her, flanked by a team of advisors and project managers. He didn't speak much. He didn't need to. His presence filled the space more than any words could. Claire's voice was calm, clear, professional, layered in years of discipline. She presented the conceptual design for the new Hale Arts Center, sustainability-focused, open concept, built to harmonize with its surroundings. When she paused, Garrett finally leaned forward, Why remove the central wall, he asked, tapping a pencil against the table. You're sacrificing control of the lighting. Claire didn't flinch. I've accounted for it. Natural light, UV-treated glass, modular shading. Art breathes better when it's not boxed in. Her tone was steady, even detached. But her heart was still learning how to behave around this man. 6 years ago, things were different. She had just turned 31, newly appointed design lead for a community art museum in a small Vermont town, full of ideas, full of trust. Garrett wasn't the CEO then. He was a senior architect, brilliant, slightly chaotic, never without ink on his hands. They met over sketches and blueprints. They grew close over late-night arguments about light angles and staircases. They fell in love somewhere between firelit drafting tables and weekend hikes in the Green Mountains. She remembered how he used to look at her, like she was the only thing that made sense. Like she wasn't just designing a building, she was building them. They had plans, a shared studio, a little home with tall windows and crooked floorboards, even, maybe, children someday, but all of that shattered the summer his father died. Thomas Whitmore. Claire's father had been one of the reviewing engineers on the Hale Bridge project when the bridge collapsed during a routine inspection, killing Garrett's father and 2 other workers. Grief turned Garrett into someone Claire didn't recognize. He didn't ask questions. He didn't wait for explanations. He saw the signature on the approval file and didn't need anything more. You knew, he'd said that night, rain slamming against the windows, Claire standing in their apartment barefoot, shaking. I didn't. She whispered. I swear, I didn't even know he was involved. But he couldn't hear her. Grief was louder than truth. He left that night, and the door never opened again. Now, back in the boardroom, he glanced up at her mid-presentation. For a second, just a second. His eyes flickered. Not cold, not cruel, but something else. Maybe curiosity, maybe memory. Claire quickly looked away. She wasn't here for that. She was here to build a building, not dig up a grave. When the meeting ended, the others filed out with polite nods and folders under their arms. Claire gathered her papers slowly, hoping to avoid crossing paths with Garrett. But of course, he waited. As she neared the door, he spoke quietly behind her. You haven't changed much. She turned, eyes guarded. You have a beat, a breath. The silence between them hung thick with unsaid words. Why did you take the job, he asked. She gave the smallest smile. Because I don't run anymore. He didn't reply, didn't nod, didn't blink. She walked past him and down the hallway. Her heels echoed like memory. Outside, the rain continued. Not heavy, not light. Just steady, like something that had been waiting a long time to be felt again. The elevator chimed softly as Claire descended to the ground floor, her hand clutching the strap of her leather bag like a lifeline. The meeting had ended hours ago, but the conversation, those few clipped words between her and Garrett, kept replaying in her mind. You haven't changed much. You have. It wasn't the words. It was the silence after them, and the eyes, his eyes, still the same steel gray that once made her feel safe. Now they just made her tired. By the time she reached the parking lot, the drizzle had turned into a steady rain. She fumbled for her keys, balancing her portfolio under one arm. Her phone slipped from the side pocket of her coat and landed face up on the wet concrete. The screen lit up as she picked it up, revealing the lock screen image. She froze, a candid photo, taken last fall. A little boy grinning at the camera, mid-laugh, sitting on the front steps of their apartment. Messy blonde hair, blue-gray eyes that sparkled with mischief. Noah. She glanced around. No one was near. Still. Her heart raced as if someone had seen. The next morning, Claire arrived early at Hale Development, hoping to avoid any awkward encounters. But fate had other plans. As she walked toward the meeting room, Garrett emerged from his office, phone in hand. Ms. Whitmore, he said, his tone professional. Could I speak with you a moment before we begin? She nodded cautiously and followed him into his office. It was spacious, minimalistic, and cold, much like the man himself. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city skyline behind his desk. Garrett gestured to the chair across from him. She sat, placing her phone face down this time. I just wanted to clarify a few specifications in your design notes, he said, opening a folder. But something in his demeanor was off. Less CEO, more something else. Almost distracted. He paused mid-sentence, then leaned back, fingers steepled. There was a boy on your phone yesterday. Is he your son? Claire's pulse skipped, a moment too long, a breath too short. She smiled politely. Yes. Garrett raised a brow. What's his name? Her voice didn't betray her. Noah. He nodded slowly, eyes narrowing, not with suspicion yet, but with something harder to read. Is his father involved? Another pause. Too many this time. Claire shook her head. No. Garrett said nothing, but Claire saw the shift in his expression. The way his jaw set slightly tighter, the way his hand gripped the folder a little too firmly before setting it aside. Very well, he said finally. Let's move on. Later that day, Garrett sat in his office long after the team had gone home. Rain streaked the windows as the sky dimmed to a dusky gray. He pulled out his own phone and opened a web browser, searched Claire Whitmore Architect, New York, then Claire Whitmore son. Nothing concrete, no mention of a father, no records linked to anyone else, only a photo on a small local news site. Claire holding a boy in her arms at a community park cleanup. There was something in the boy's eyes, something unsettlingly familiar. Garrett closed his phone and stared out at the darkening city. Meanwhile, Claire sat cross-legged on the floor of her Brooklyn apartment. Noah leaned against her, holding up a crayon drawing. Look, Mommy, it's me and you in the fire truck. She kissed the top of his head. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Noah beamed, but then grew thoughtful. Mommy. Yes, baby is my daddy. A superhero. Claire froze. Every answer she'd rehearsed over the years crumbled in that moment. She touched his cheek and smiled softly. Your daddy is far away, but I love you enough for both of us. Noah nodded solemnly, as if that was enough, but Claire knew better. For how long, the rain didn't stop. It tapped gently against the glass windows of Claire's apartment, as if mimicking the restlessness inside her. The city hummed faintly below distant sirens, an occasional honk, but inside her small Brooklyn home, it was quiet, too quiet. Noah had long since fallen asleep, curled up with his stuffed dinosaur. Claire sat by the window, knees drawn to her chest, watching droplets streak down the pane. Her thoughts refused to settle. Garrett had seen Noah's photo. He had asked questions, not many, not enough to confirm suspicion, but enough to make her chest feel like it was caught in a vice. She had been careful for 5 years. No photos at work, no shared last name, no breadcrumbs leading back to him. And yet, just one glance at Noah, and she saw something shift behind Garrett's eyes, a flicker, recognition, maybe, or a memory he couldn't place. She pressed her forehead to the cold glass. The truth was a fragile thing, and tonight, it trembled. Across town, high above Ashburn Heights, Garrett Hale stood alone in his penthouse. No lights on, just the blue glow from the city, filtering in through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He poured a glass of scotch, but didn't drink it, just held it, and stared. His mind was a carousel of moments he had long buried. Claire laughing beside him on a summer trail in Vermont. Claire biting her lip as she adjusted a pencil line on a shared blueprint. Claire standing silent in their apartment the day everything fell apart. 6 years ago, the rain had fallen like a curse. He had come home early, documents in hand. The investigation report was clear. Or so he thought. Thomas Whitmore's signature, bold and final, on the last engineering approval for the Hale Bridge. 3 lives lost. One of them, his father. And Claire. She said she didn't know. I swear, Garrett, I had no idea my father was even involved, but all he saw was betrayal. He had screamed, accused, told her to leave. Or maybe he had been the one to walk out. The only thing he remembered clearly was her face, pale, tear-streaked, framed by rain, and the silence that followed. Now, years later, that same rain whispered at his windows, but it no longer sounded like grief. It sounded like guilt. He sat on the edge of his bed and opened his phone. The photo of Noah from the news article was still open. He zoomed in slowly. The curve of the smile, the shape of the eyes. It wasn't just familiarity. It was him. His heart pounded louder than the rain outside. Back in Brooklyn, Claire finally stood and walked to Noah's room. The little boy was fast asleep, one arm wrapped around his dinosaur, the other reaching toward the edge of the bed, as if searching for something. She gently tucked the blanket higher around his shoulders and kissed his forehead. "I'm sorry," she whispered, brushing a curl from his face. She walked back to the window and stood there for a long time. Her heart knew what her mind didn't want to admit. The past wasn't staying buried, it was waking up, and it was knocking. It started like any other weekday morning. Claire helped Noah into his little yellow raincoat, carefully fastening each button as he wriggled with excitement. "Mommy, I get to bring my rocket ship for show and tell today," he beamed. She smiled, smoothing down his damp curls. "That's great, sweetheart. Be gentle with it." Okay, outside. The rain had eased to a drizzle. Claire tucked the rocket ship carefully into his backpack and walked him the 4 blocks to Maple Grove Day Center, a small, welcoming daycare tucked beneath a red brick walk-up. It wasn't far from the Hale Development Building, but far enough to keep her heart steady. Usually, that afternoon, a last-minute project update forced Claire to bring Noah back to the office with her briefly. Her assistant had called in sick. No babysitter was available. The update would take no more than 20 minutes, she told herself. They'd be in and out. Noah held her hand tightly as they stepped into the gleaming lobby of Hale Development. His eyes lit up at the tall ceilings and marble floors. "Is this a castle?" he whispered. Claire laughed softly. "Kind of. A very serious castle with lots of coffee and no dragons." She led him to a small private conference room just off the main hall. "Stay here. Okay, draw something for me. I'll be right back." Noah nodded solemnly and reached into his backpack for crayons. Claire placed her phone on the table next to him and hurried down the hall. Garrett didn't expect to find a child alone in one of his meeting rooms. He had just stepped out of a call when he noticed the door slightly ajar. He pushed it open, and there he was. A little boy in a yellow raincoat, sitting at the round table, drawing a picture with focused intensity. Garrett was about to call security when the boy looked up and smiled. There it was again. That smile, that spark in the eyes. Something in Garrett froze. The boy looked familiar. "Hi," the boy said cheerfully. "I'm Noah." Garrett stepped inside slowly. "Hi, Noah. What are you drawing?" The boy turned the paper toward him. A woman, a small child, and a tall man standing under an umbrella in the rain. Garrett blinked. "She's my mom," Noah said, pointing. "That's me. And that's someone I made up. He's tall and has a serious face like yours." Garrett felt something in his chest twist. He cleared his throat. "I see. It's a good drawing." Noah smiled again. "My mommy says I'm good at imagining things." Before Garrett could reply, a voice came from the hallway. Noah Claire stood at the doorway, breathless. Her eyes darted from her son to Garrett. The moment froze. Claire's voice dropped. "What are you doing here?" Garrett looked at her, then at the boy, then back again. "You left him alone." "It was for 5 minutes," she said, stepping forward quickly, placing herself protectively between them. "He's fine." Garrett didn't argue. He just looked at Noah once more, then walked past her. He didn't say another word. That night, Claire sat by Noah's bed after reading his favorite book for the 3rd time. He was already drifting off when he murmured, "Mommy, yes, baby, that man at the office. Was he someone we know?" She paused. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes. "No," she whispered, then added softly, "but maybe one day." Noah nodded sleepily and rolled onto his side. Claire sat there in the dark, heart aching. She knew what Garrett had seen, the resemblance, the possibility. The storm was no longer far off. It was here, and it had a name. One kiss. Under the rain, and the ruthless CEO lost all control. The storm had moved in overnight, By morning, Ashburn Heights was drenched in a curtain of cold spring rain. It blurred the skyline beyond Garrett's office window, washing the city in a kind of gray stillness. But Garrett's thoughts were anything but still. He hadn't slept. The image of Noah Whitmore, his messy blonde hair, the slanted smile, the eyes wouldn't leave him. It haunted him like an unfinished sentence. The more he stared at the boy's drawing, the more he felt something splinter inside. He hadn't planned to ask questions, not really. But now he needed answers. And there was only one place to begin. Garrett walked into the records division of Hale Development with his usual quiet authority. Most people didn't question when the CEO asked for something, but Logan Barrett, his longtime executive assistant and project director, raised an eyebrow. "You're digging through 6-year-old project files," Logan asked, setting down his coffee. Garrett kept his tone even. "Yes, I want everything on the Hale Bridge collapse. All internal drafts, memos, field reports, not just the final version." Logan hesitated. "There's nothing new in there. Garrett, that case was closed, and it's not good for your stress levels to dredge up." "Find it." Garrett cut in. "Today." Logan's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Garrett turned and walked away, hands in his pockets, pulse heavy in his throat. Something in Logan's reaction unsettled him, a little too quick to deflect, a little too polished, like someone who'd practiced the same answer too many times. By late afternoon, Garrett sat alone in the archive room with a heavy cardboard box beside him. His sleeves rolled to the elbow, his tie discarded, his eyes sharp with focus. He scanned engineering memos, handwritten inspection logs, scanned blueprints, and then halfway through a folder labeled Revisions, Internal Use Only. He paused. The document wasn't part of the original investigation file. He knew, because he had read it 100 times back then. This one was different. It was a draft, a preliminary recommendation to downgrade the steel grade on load-bearing joints, marked urgent, cost-saving initiative, signed not by Thomas Whitmore, but by Logan Barrett. Garrett's breath caught. He flipped another page, another memo, this one showing pushback from the structural safety team. It had been overruled. Then came the shock. An email from Logan to a contractor. "I've taken care of it. The signature will hold. No one's going to dig this deep." Garrett leaned back in his chair, jaw clenched, eyes burning with realization. Thomas Whitmore hadn't approved the change. He may never have even known. The signature on the final report was there, but forged coerced, or submitted through misdirection. Logan had buried this for years, and Garrett had believed it. He had taken that pain and handed it to Claire. He had hated her, destroyed her trust, walked away. He whispered the words, bitter in his throat. "I was wrong." That night, the rain followed him home. Garrett stood in his kitchen, lights off, the document folder spread out on the counter. The truth had come late, but it had come. He thought of Claire, of her voice when she'd said, "I don't run anymore." He thought of Noah, a boy who had done nothing but smile, and of Thomas Whitmore, a man who had died with his name tainted, his daughter abandoned. Garrett closed his eyes, then reached for his phone. "James," he said to his head of legal, voice rough, "I need you to look into something, quietly and fast." At that same hour, in Brooklyn, Claire sat by her window again. The rain tapped gently against the glass, as if it, too, carried something unresolved. She didn't know yet that the truth was rising, that files long buried were coming to light. All she knew was the look Garrett had given her earlier that day. Not suspicion, but something deeper, something shaken. She wrapped her arms around herself and whispered into the dark, "Please, don't take him from me." It wasn't raining that afternoon, but somehow it still felt like it. The air was thick inside the meeting room on the 31st floor, thicker than the sunlight pouring through the windows, thicker than the silence pressing against the walls. Claire stood by the long table, rolling up her design plans with careful precision. Her hands moved calmly, but inside, she was unraveling. She had seen it in his face all morning. Garrett Hale wasn't himself, not the version she had come to recognize in these meetings, calculated, focused, impenetrable. He was different today, distracted, restless. His questions less about design, more about timing. His gaze more searching than critical. And now, everyone else had cleared the room. Everyone, except him, Claire. Her name sounded strange in his voice. Not sharp like it used to be. Not cold like it had become. Just real. She turned slowly. Garrett stood at the far end of the table, holding a folder in one hand, the other resting flat on the glass surface. He didn't move, didn't blink. "I need to ask you something," he said. His voice was low, controlled, but beneath it an edge, a break in the armor. She nodded once, not trusting her voice. Garrett opened the folder and slid a single photo across the table. It stopped inches from her hand. Noah, his daycare ID photo, bright smile, soft curls, those unmistakable eyes. "I found this," Garrett said quietly, "and I did the math." Claire's breath caught. He stepped closer. "Born 9 months after you left Vermont." Silence. No father on the birth certificate. No public mention of anyone. She didn't speak, didn't look up. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table. Garrett's voice grew strained. "Claire, is he mine?" The moment fractured. The dam inside her broke. She closed her eyes, and tears slid down her cheeks before she could stop them. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "Yes." The word fell like a stone into still water. No ripples, just weight. Garrett stood frozen. He looked down at the photo, then back at her, like he was seeing her for the first time. "You knew," he said. "Not a question, an accusation, a wound." "I didn't know I was pregnant until weeks after you left," Claire said, stepping back, her voice hoarse. "I tried to call you. I did." Garrett's jaw tightened. "Then why didn't you tell me? Because when I heard your voice, I couldn't speak. You sounded like you hated me." His hands curled into fists at his sides. "You let me live 5 years without knowing I had a son." She wiped her face and stood straighter. "I let you live 5 years without more hate. That was the choice." Garrett looked away, stared at the window, the city below, the sky above, anywhere but her. "I deserved to know," he whispered. Claire's voice softened. "And what would you have done? Garrett, taken him from me. Looked at him the way you looked at me that day in the rain." He turned back, and for a moment, he didn't look like the man who ran a company. He looked like the man she once loved, wounded, raw, human. "I don't know what I would have done," he admitted, "but I would have tried." Claire stepped forward. "I did try, every single day. I raised him with no child support, no family, no sleep, just love. That's what he has. That's what I gave him." A pause, heavy, sacred. Garrett closed the folder slowly, took a breath that sounded like regret. "I want to see him," he said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Then you better ask yourself what you're bringing into his life, love, or more of what broke us." She gathered her things and walked to the door. As she reached it, she paused. "I never stopped loving the version of you I knew back then," she said quietly, then left. Garrett remained still, the photo of Noah still lying on the table, smiling up at him. He reached out and touched the edge with trembling fingers. It was real. The boy, the years, the weight of every wrong turn. The truth had come like thunder, and now, the rain would follow. The next day, the sky cleared, but inside, both Claire and Garrett, the storm still churned. In Brooklyn, Claire sat across from her closest friend, Rachel Monroe, a fellow architect and one of the few people who knew the whole truth. They met at a quiet cafe tucked behind a bookstore, the kind of place where time seemed to pause just enough to breathe. Rachel stirred her coffee slowly. "You told him," she said gently. Claire nodded, eyes on the steam rising from her cup. Rachel leaned back, and Claire hesitated. "He was angry," she said softly, "but not just angry. He looked broken, like he was realizing the past wasn't what he thought it was." Rachel watched her carefully. "And how do you feel?" Claire let out a slow breath. "Tired," she said. Like I've been carrying this weight for so long, and now that it's out, I don't even know what to do with my hands. Rachel reached over and squeezed her fingers. You protected Noah. You did what you had to do. I know, Claire said, but there's a part of me that wonders, what if I had told him sooner? Would any of this have been different? Rachel's voice was quiet, but firm. Maybe. Or maybe he wasn't ready to hear it then. Maybe. He needed to lose something before he understood what it meant to have it. Claire looked away, tears catching in her lashes. Meanwhile, 2 hours north in the small town of Glenwell, Garrett stood in his mother's garden. Elaine Hale had always kept her late husband's rose bushes blooming, even after all these years. She moved slowly now, arthritis stiffening her joints, but her eyes still held the same clarity, the same quiet wisdom. Garrett sat on the bench near the porch steps, hands clasped between his knees. I have a son, he said finally. Elaine looked up from the flower bed. She didn't blink, didn't gasp. She just nodded once, then asked. Claire Garrett's voice cracked. Yes. Elaine stood slowly and walked over to him. She didn't speak right away. I blamed her, he said, all these years. For what happened to Dad, for what I thought her father did. I walked away. Mom, and she raised a child alone. Elaine sat beside him, folded her hands in her lap. And now Garrett shook his head. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to fix what I broke. Elaine's voice was soft. Fixing things doesn't mean undoing the past. It means showing up now, and tomorrow, and again the day after that. Garrett looked down at his hands. I'm scared. What if he looks at me and sees a stranger? What if I become the same man I was after Dad died, full of rage and blame? Elaine touched his arm. Then don't be. You get to choose who you are now. That boy didn't ask for any of this. But maybe he's the reason you stopped carrying hate. Garrett swallowed hard, and for the first time in years, he wept. Not because he was ashamed, but because he was ready. That evening, Claire tucked Noah into bed after a long day at the park. The little boy curled against his pillow, sleepy eyes fluttering. Mommy, he murmured. Yes, sweetheart, that man from the office. I dreamed he came to play Legos with me. Claire froze. Her heart thudded in her chest. What did he say? She asked gently. Noah smiled, already drifting into sleep. He said he'd come back. Claire leaned down and kissed his forehead, whispering against his skin. I don't know if that's a promise or a warning. She turned off the light and sat beside his bed long after he'd fallen asleep. The silence between her and Garrett had cracked wide open. But what came next was a question no one could answer, not yet. The storm had passed, but in Garrett Hale's office, another one was about to begin. The folder sat on the desk between them, worn at the edges, heavy with what it held. Garrett had reviewed every page, every footnote, every timestamp. And now, Logan Barrett stood on the opposite side of the desk, arms folded, eyes too calm. Garrett didn't rush. He opened the folder slowly, slid out one of the early memos, and placed it in front of Logan. Recognize this. Logan's brow lifted just slightly. Should I? Garrett's voice was measured. You authored it. Cost-saving proposal. You pushed for a material downgrade on a bridge. Logan didn't blink. The board signed off on it. No. Garrett said they didn't. That approval was falsified. He pulled out the second page, an internal email, buried deep in the archives. I've taken care of it. The signature will hold. No one's going to dig this deep. Garrett's eyes narrowed. I dug. Logan stayed silent for a moment, then let out a faint, humorless breath. So, this is what we're doing now. Dragging out decade-old files to play moral hero, Garrett stood, slowly, deliberately. I buried my grief in this company. Logan, I built everything we have because I needed something solid after the bridge collapse tore my life apart. He stepped around the desk, standing inches from him, and you let me hate the wrong man. Logan's expression hardened. I did what I had to do. We were over budget, under pressure. Your father rushed approvals all the time. Don't pretend he was a saint. Garrett's voice dropped. This isn't about my father. It always was. Logan snapped. You wanted blood. You needed someone to blame, and I gave it to you. That engineer, Thomas Whitmore, he was a convenient target. Garrett's jaw tightened. He was innocent, and you let Claire, his daughter, become collateral damage. Logan raised a hand. You think this company runs on virtue. Garrett, wake up. Every deal is a compromise. Every success has a shadow. Garrett didn't flinch. You're right. He walked back behind the desk and pressed the intercom. Danielle, call security. Mr. Barrett will be leaving the premises immediately. His clearance is to be revoked. Logan stiffened. You're making a mistake. No, Garrett said. I made it 6 years ago. This is me correcting it. By the time security escorted Logan out, Garrett remained at the window, staring out over Ashburn Heights. His reflection in the glass looked older today, but clearer, stronger. He picked up the phone and called his legal team. We're issuing a formal statement, he said. I want every corrected file ready for release. Internal memo, engineering logs, all of it. We're clearing Thomas Whitmore's name. There was a pause on the line. Sir, that's going to raise questions, headlines, possible lawsuits. I know, Garrett said simply. We'll face them. That evening, Claire received an unexpected email. Subject line for your father. Attached a PDF folder labeled Internal Review, Hale Bridge Collapse. Her hands trembled as she opened the file, and when she saw the truth laid out plainly, documented, time-stamped, she covered her mouth with her hands and wept, not because she was shocked, but because someone had finally listened. Later that night, Claire stood in her apartment, a copy of the documents printed and held tightly in her hand. Noah was asleep, and the rain had returned soft again, like forgiveness. She stepped out onto the fire escape, looked up at the sky, and whispered, "Thank you," and miles away, in his own silence. Garrett sat alone at his desk. He looked at the framed photo of his father, then at the blank space beside it. There would be another photo soon, one of a boy with a crooked smile and eyes full of curiosity, and it wouldn't be hidden anymore. The press conference had been scheduled for noon, but by 11:30, reporters were already filling the atrium of the Hale Development Tower. The air buzzed with curiosity, speculation, and the flashing of early camera shutters. At the far end of the room stood a sleek, minimalist podium beneath the Hale Company logo. A small group of staff stood nearby, exchanging whispers, and standing just beyond the edge of the crowd, tucked in a quiet corner behind a column of marble and glass. Claire Whitmore. She hadn't planned to be here, but when the anonymous email came that morning from Garrett's office, just a simple line, "Today, at noon. You might want to see this." She couldn't stay away. 12 o'clock sharp, the noise in the room hushed, and then he stepped out. Garrett Hale, hair neatly combed, dark suit pressed, but his expression wasn't corporate today. It was human, worn but resolute. Not a man defending a company, a man redeeming himself. He adjusted the microphone, cleared his throat, and began. 6 years ago, a structural failure on the Hale Bridge took 3 lives. One of them was my father. He paused. Not for effect, but because it mattered. I blame that tragedy on an engineer named Thomas Whitmore, whose signature appeared on the final approval documents. The investigation at the time confirmed that narrative, so I believed it. A deeper breath, I no longer do. Gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd. Garrett's voice steadied. After re-examining archived internal files, our legal and structural teams uncovered evidence that key documents were falsified, misrepresenting the role Mr. Whitmore played. The decisions that led to the collapse were made without his knowledge and against his recommendations. Another pause. This company allowed a man's name to be stained by lies, and I, personally, allowed that stain to spread to the people who loved him. Garrett's eyes scanned the room, and for a brief second, they found Claire. She didn't move, but her heart did. I offer no excuses, only action. Effective today. The Hale Foundation is funding a public memorial in Mr. Whitmore's honor at the site of the former bridge. All public records will be amended to reflect his innocence, and an official apology is being issued to his surviving family." He lowered the microphone slightly, looked down, then said one final thing, quietly, but it echoed louder than the rest. "Sometimes the hardest thing isn't facing the truth, it's living long enough to deserve it." He stepped down. The room erupted into questions, flashing bulbs, urgent voices calling his name. But Garrett didn't linger. He didn't need to. Claire stood in her corner, hands pressed together tightly, breath held still in her chest. She didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, she closed her eyes for a brief moment and whispered, "Thank you, Dad." Later that night, the city returned to its rhythm, and somewhere across Brooklyn, a little boy stood in his pajamas on the windowsill, staring out at the glowing skyline. Noah pointed. "Is that where you work?" Mommy Claire smiled and joined him. "It is. Do you think the man with the serious face is there right now?" Claire hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe. And maybe one day soon, you'll meet him again. But next time, not by accident." Noah looked thoughtful, then reached for her hand, and in the quiet of their apartment, with the soft hum of the city below, Claire finally felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. The rain returned, like it had been waiting, not in sheets or thunder, but soft, steady, like a memory you can't forget. Claire stood at the edge of Willow Park, her coat pulled tightly around her as her eyes scanned the playground. Noah was just ahead, chasing bubbles with a small group of kids. His laughter floated through the air like birdsong unbothered by clouds. She was about to call for him when she saw the figure approaching from the path behind the trees. Dark coat, steady stride, familiar silhouette. Garrett. He moved slowly, as if unsure how close was too close, but when Noah looked up and saw him, his face lit up. "Hey, it's the serious face guy." Claire blinked, stunned, then laughed because Noah didn't know. Not really. Not yet. Garrett crouched as the boy ran up, arms open wide. "Hi, Noah. You came." "Yeah," Garrett said softly. "I did." Claire walked over, heart thudding. "He remembered you." Garrett stood, meeting her eyes. "I hoped he would." There was a long pause. Rain tapped against the leaves above them. "I saw the press conference," Claire said. "You didn't have to." "Yes," Garrett cut in gently. "I did." She searched his face, for hesitation, for defense, but all she saw was the man he used to be. Wounded, yes, but healing. "I don't know what comes next," he said. "I don't expect you to forget what I did, or what I didn't do." Claire looked away, watched Noah chasing rain droplets, his arms stretched to the sky. "I don't know what comes next either," she said. "But I think maybe we stop pretending it doesn't matter." A quiet laugh escaped Garrett's throat. "Claire," he said, stepping closer, "I want to be part of his life, not just around him, with him, if you'll let me." She nodded slowly. "I want that too," she whispered, "but not for me, for him, and for you," he asked. Her eyes met his. Rain fell between them, gentle and constant, and then she stepped forward and kissed him. Not a kiss of passion, not of promises, but of memory, of understanding, of finally letting go. They stood like that, in the middle of a quiet park, under a gray sky. Not the same people they were 6 years ago, not even close, but maybe something better, maybe something real. Later, Claire, Garrett, and Noah walked toward the edge of the park together. Noah looked up. "Are we going to be a family now?" They paused. Claire looked at Garrett. Garrett looked at Claire, and in the softest voice, she said, "We're going to try." The wedding wasn't grand. It was never meant to be. Just a garden, a few chairs, sunlight filtering through the maple trees in Claire's backyard, and laughter soft, genuine, echoing across the grass as Noah Whitmore, now in a tiny suit and mismatched sneakers, walked proudly down the short aisle with a satin pillow in his hands. Claire wore a simple white dress. Garrett wore a gray vest, and a look that said nothing except everything. There were no long speeches, no orchestra, just whispered vows, and two hands held together like something found after a long, long winter. Afterward, while guests mingled and music drifted from a Bluetooth speaker, Garrett sat on the porch steps with Noah. They were building a tower out of Legos, the bright-colored pieces scattered in a pile between them. "You ever built a skyscraper before?" Garrett asked. Noah shook his head, focused. "Only space rockets." "Well," Garrett said, "we can start with something smaller. Maybe a tower that won't fall." Noah smiled, like a real one. "Yeah," Garrett said, looking toward the house where Claire stood laughing with Rachel, "like a real one." Later that night, when the guests had left and the garden lights flickered like stars, Claire stepped into Noah's room to find Garrett sitting at the edge of the bed, reading aloud. Noah was already drifting to sleep, and then the brave little fox found his way home. Not because he was perfect, but because someone waited for him. Garrett closed the book and looked up. Claire smiled. "He likes your voice," she whispered. Garrett stood and followed her to the hallway. For a moment, they stood in the quiet. Then Claire asked, "Are you happy?" Garrett didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for her hand. "I'm something better than happy," he said. "I'm home." Rain began to fall outside again, soft, persistent, familiar. Claire walked to the window and opened it slightly, let the cool air drift in. Behind her, Garrett knelt beside a half-finished Lego tower. He looked up at Claire and smiled. "It's not perfect," he said. She joined him on the floor, placing a piece at the top. "It doesn't have to be." Noah wandered in, rubbing his eyes. "Are we building again?" Garrett reached out a hand, always, and together. The three of them sat under the soft glow of a rainy evening building, something new, something small, but strong. And for the first time in a very long time, it didn't fall. Sometimes, love isn't broken by hate, but by silence, by assumptions, by the quiet ways we let fear speak louder than trust. Claire and Garrett's story is not just about romance. It's about how easily we pass judgment, how quickly we choose sides when we don't know the whole truth, and how deeply the wounds of prejudice and assumption can cut, not just through careers and reputations, but through families, legacies, and innocent hearts. How many times have we looked away instead of asking harder questions? How often have we let guilt or grief turn into walls? But sometimes, just sometimes, it's not too late to tear those walls down, because love isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's quiet, steady, like a tower rebuilt piece by piece by hands that once destroyed it. If this story moved you, if it made you pause, reflect, or even cry just a little, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Here, we don't just tell stories, we hold space for the ones that change us. And trust us, the next story may just find you. We'll see you soon.